Hi, I'm Marin. At my grandfather's will reading, my family handed me my inheritance, a single dollar. They laughed. My brother even said, "Don't cry, sis. Grandpa's just paying for your failures." The room exploded with laughter, and I just sat there, smiling through the kind of pain that leaves a mark you can't see. But the next morning, a lawyer showed up, and that same dollar they mocked me for, it unlocked a secret my family had buried for decades. One that would destroy everything they thought they'd stolen. They called me worthless. But tell me, how do you destroy someone who's already been left with nothing? Before we dive in, where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. It was one of those gray Seattle mornings when the clouds felt low enough to touch. The air outside was damp, the kind that clings to your coat and seeps into your bones. I parked outside Mr. Hale's law office, took a slow breath, and tried to prepare myself for whatever form of goodbye this would be. My grandfather's death had been quiet, like everything he did, measured, thoughtful, leaving questions behind instead of answers. Inside, the office smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. That scent, his scent, hit me the moment I stepped through the door. For a second, I could almost see him sitting behind a desk, glasses low on his nose, reading something that probably mattered more than I would ever know. I spotted them immediately. Gareth, my older brother, sitting like he owned the place. His watch gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his grin already rehearsed. Mom sat beside him, avoiding my eyes, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. Across the table were our two cousins, both of them whispering and smirking like schoolboys about to pull a cruel prank. "Morning," I said quietly, though no one responded. Mr. Hale stood near the head of the table, his tone formal, tired. "Thank you all for coming. As executor of Mr. Wythe's estate, it's my duty to read his final will and testament." The sound of papers shifting filled the silence. My heart thudded once, then steadied. I didn't expect much. My grandfather had always favored Gareth for the family business. I just wanted to hear his name one last time and know he'd thought of me at all. He began with the formalities. The estate, the properties, the stocks. It went on like a slow symphony I had no part in. Every few lines, someone else's name was called. Every time, Gareth's smile widened. Mine never came. Then Mr. Hale cleared his throat, the way people do before something uncomfortable. "And lastly, to my granddaughter, Marin Wythe," he hesitated, "I leave $1. The room broke. My cousins burst into laughter first, loud and sharp. Gareth leaned back, grinning so wide his teeth showed. "Guess Grandpa's paying for your failures," he said. His tone was honeyed. Poison. A dollar bill fluttered across the table, landing near my hand. For a moment I couldn't move. My mother pressed her lips together and turned her face away. The sound of laughter filled the air, echoing against the paneled walls. I reached for the bill, folded it slowly, and met Gareth's eyes. "I suppose even $1 has its worth," I said. My voice came out steady, though my palms were shaking. He smirked. "You always were good at pretending that scraps were gifts." That was my cue to leave. Outside, the chill hit me like a slap. The Seattle rain had begun, soft, insistent, the kind that never really stops. I walked to the parking lot, each step heavy, the echoes of their laughter still following me. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my hands had gone cold. I took the dollar from my pocket, unfolded it, and smoothed out the crease. It looked ordinary, old, faded, nothing more than a joke. But the way my grandfather's name had been spoken, something in it didn't sit right. He wasn't a cruel man, not to me, never to me. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. "He never did anything without meaning." The windshield fogged as the rain thickened. I turned on the wipers and just sat there, watching the streaks of water slide down the glass. Memories crept in, uninvited. Me sitting in his study as a child, the smell of pipe smoke and cedar, the way he'd look at me when I asked too many questions. Patient, amused. "Curiosity isn't weakness, Marin," he once told me. "It's how you survive people who think they know better." I pressed the bill between my fingers. "So what are you trying to tell me?" I muttered. The phone buzzed, jolting me. A message from an unknown number. No, Mr. Hale. "Marin, please don't throw that dollar away. Come by the office tomorrow. There's something I need to show you privately." My heart quickened. The screen blurred slightly as a raindrop hit it. I wiped it with my sleeve, reading the message again. Tomorrow, privately. I folded the dollar carefully, tucking it into my wallet as if it were made of glass. The laughter from earlier still echoed in my head, but it felt distant now, like a sound from another life. I started the car, headlights cutting through the mist. The city glowed pale through the rain. Somewhere out there was a truth I hadn't been ready for, but maybe he'd always known I'd come looking. $1, I said softly, half to myself, half to him. "Let's see what you're really worth." As I pulled out of the lot, the rain grew heavier. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calmer than I felt. For the first time all morning, I didn't feel small. I felt curious. Tomorrow's meeting might explain everything, or reveal something I'm not ready to face. The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. I'd tossed and turned through the night, replaying the lawyer's message over and over again. There was something haunting about it, so brief, yet loaded. I kept staring at my wallet, where the dollar sat, folded neatly like it had always belonged there. I left earlier than I needed to, just to walk a bit before stepping back into that office. Downtown was still shaking off the morning fog. People hurried past in their coats, coffee cups in hand, while I stood at the corner, hands in my pockets, trying to summon the same calm I'd faked yesterday. Inside, the receptionist gave me a glance that felt different. She stood as I approached, brushing imaginary dust from her blazer. "Miss Wythe," she said, her tone more measured this time, "Mr. Hale's been expecting you." She led me to the same conference room, but something about the space felt heavier, like the air wasn't circulating right. The blinds were pulled halfway down, letting in a dim stream of light that made everything look faded. Mr. Hale stood near the table, hands folded, face calm, but his eyes didn't match. They flicked toward me, then quickly away. "Thank you for coming, Marin," he said. "Please sit." I sat. He slid a folder across the table, one hand still resting on top of it. "Your grandfather left something else, not officially in the will. He wanted you to find it yourself." He lifted his hand and leaned back slightly, giving me space. I stared at the folder for a beat before flipping it open. Inside was an envelope, sealed in wax with the imprint of his old signet ring. A ring I hadn't seen in years. My heart jumped a little. On the front, in that familiar shaky scrawl I knew from birthday cards and sticky notes, were 6 words, for Marin. "When they laugh at you." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten note, neatly folded, and a small brass key taped to the bottom corner. $1 opens the rest. I looked up, confused. "What does this mean?" Mr. Hale pressed his lips together, then exhaled like he'd been holding it in since yesterday. "There's a property," he began. "Reed Haven, secluded, quiet. Your grandfather once owned it, far outside town. Officially, it was marked as sold almost 20 years ago, but the records were sealed. Hard to trace unless you're looking." My fingers tightened around the envelope. "And the dollar?" "There's a safety deposit box registered under your grandfather's name. Reed Haven was listed as the forwarding address, but it can only be opened by the original inheritor. That dollar, in legal terms, made you his direct beneficiary. So the others can't touch it? Not without you. I sat back, processing. My grandfather had never played games. He'd always been a man of his word. So if this was a riddle, it wasn't meant to taunt, it was meant to protect. Mr. Hale lowered his voice. I'm not supposed to be telling you this, Marin. If the rest of your family knew, I nodded slowly. They'd come after it, or me. I believe that's why he chose this path, he said. Quiet, deliberate. You were meant to uncover it alone. I stood a minute later, letter and key in hand, the folder tucked beneath my arm. Mr. Hale didn't offer to shake hands. He only nodded once and said, "Be careful." I stepped out into the afternoon drizzle. The sky was heavy with that familiar Seattle gray, and as I adjusted my coat, I caught sight of someone across the street, Melissa, Gareth's assistant. She had a phone pressed to her ear, but she wasn't talking, just watching. When she noticed I'd seen her, she turned casually and ducked around the corner. Of course, Gareth wasn't subtle. He never had been. I walked a little faster to my car, locking the door the second I got inside. My fingers tightened around the folder on the passenger seat. They were watching. He was watching. Later that evening, back in my apartment, everything felt sharper than usual. The ticking of the wall clock, the low hum of the heater, the faint tapping of rain against the windows. I hadn't turned on the lights yet. I just sat on the edge of my couch, the envelope still in my lap. I took the dollar out again. This time, I held it up to the light, turning it slowly. That's when I saw it. In the bottom corner, so faint I almost missed it, were a series of tiny etched letters, RH41. It wasn't ink. It was more like a burn, something heat-pressed into the fibers. My heart skipped. "Reed Haven," I whispered. 41. A code, a lockbox, an address. I opened my laptop, pulled up the county property records. My fingers moved faster than my brain. I typed in the name, Reed Haven Estate, Snohomish County, Washington. It popped up. Status, inactive, not sold, not demolished. Just quiet, waiting. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. This wasn't just a message, it was a trail. And if Gareth was watching me now, it meant he suspected something. But whatever my grandfather left me, he clearly didn't want them finding it. I closed the laptop slowly, heart beating harder than it had in days. "All right, Grandpa," I said quietly into the room. "Let's find out what you left me." I didn't sleep much after uncovering the code. My mind was racing too fast. Questions stacked on top of each other, each one heavier than the last. But one thing was clear. My grandfather didn't leave me that dollar as an insult. It was an invitation. And I wasn't about to leave it unanswered. The next morning, I filled a thermos with coffee, packed my grandfather's letter, the key, and the dollar into my purse, and started the drive north. Seattle faded behind me, giving way to quiet backroads lined with damp evergreens and the occasional farmhouse cloaked in morning mist. I followed the directions I'd scribbled down from the county records until the GPS lost its signal. About a mile off the paved road, I finally found it. Reed Haven. The gate looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Weathered wood, iron hinges streaked with rust, and a small plaque with the name barely visible under the moss. I pulled up and got out, my boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. The cold bit into my cheeks, and my breath puffed out in soft clouds. There, on the right side of the gate, was a narrow metal box, built into a post. It was old, scratched, almost invisible from a distance. But there it was, the number 41 faintly engraved into its surface. I stared at it for a long second, then took the dollar from my wallet. My fingers hesitated. This all felt absurd, like I was walking into some elaborate story that couldn't possibly be real. Still, I slid the bill into the slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, click. A low mechanical sound, followed by a soft groan as the gate creaked open just a few inches, enough to let one person in. "No way," I whispered. I stepped inside, slowly, unsure of what I expected. The estate was vast. The tall grass had overtaken the driveway. Ivy had crept up the stone walls of the main house, gripping the structure like it was holding onto a secret. Windows stared out like tired eyes. But the bones of the place, they were solid, still standing, still waiting. The front door groaned open when I pushed it. I stepped into a wide foyer where silence ruled. The air smelled of old wood, faint cedar, and dust. My footsteps echoed across the cracked marble floor. The rooms on the first floor looked undisturbed, like no one had touched anything in decades. Shelves of books, family portraits, a grandfather clock frozen at 4:17. Time had simply stopped here. I made my way toward the hallway at the back, drawn by something I couldn't name. That's when I saw it. A study door, heavy oak, sealed with a thick chain across the handle. My hand tightened around the brass key. It fit perfectly. Inside was a room preserved in time. Dust floated through rays of light from a cracked window. A large desk sat in the middle, an old lamp tilted to the side, and on the wall, an antique safe embedded in stone. But it was the photo on the desk that stopped me. It was of my grandfather holding me as a little girl. I must have been 5 or 6. He was laughing, mouth wide, eyes soft. Different than the stern, quiet man I remembered. On the back, in his writing, "You always saw what others ignored." I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my coat. Then I turned to the safe. It took a few tries to get it open, the dial stiff with age, but finally it clicked. The door swung wide, revealing rows of manila folders and a thick leather journal labeled Estate Log, 1975-20. I opened the first page and saw his handwriting again. More precise here, more deliberate. They think I owe them. They never worked a day for what they demand. But Marin, she understands value, not price. I blinked hard, swallowing the lump in my throat. This was him seeing me. Not for what I'd failed to become in their eyes, but for what I truly was. Quiet, determined, watching when everyone else was shouting. I sat on the floor, journal in my lap, flipping through page after page. Notes about property holdings, trusts, investments, names I didn't recognize. But woven between the numbers were fragments of his thoughts, judgments, disappointments, and so much frustration with the people who'd gathered to laugh at me just days ago. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours before hunger finally reminded me I hadn't eaten. I stood slowly, placed the journal back in the safe, and locked it. But as I turned to leave, a flash of light caught my eye. Headlights. I crept to the front room and peeked out from behind the curtains. A black SUV had pulled up just outside the gate. The engine was running, but no one got out. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message, "You shouldn't be there. Walk away before it's too late." I froze. Then, just as quickly, I turned the phone off. "They already took everything once," I whispered. "I'm not leaving." I waited in the shadows, unmoving, watching the SUV. After a minute, it backed up slowly and disappeared down the road. Once the house fell silent again, I headed back to the study to grab my purse. Just as I reached the desk, the floorboard behind me creaked. I turned fast, heart in my throat. Nothing. No one. Only the cold air pushing through a cracked window near the far wall. Then I saw it. The lamp on the desk flickered once, illuminating something I hadn't noticed earlier. A second page beneath the journal, nearly stuck to the bottom of the drawer. I pulled it out. Another note in his handwriting. "Trust only what's hidden in plain sight." Trust only what's hidden in plain sight. Those words vibrated in my mind as I left Reed Haven, driving away in the quiet dusk. The darkness pressed in, but so did a fierce resolve. What he hid was never meant to stay hidden forever. The next morning's silence broke the moment my phone rang. The screen lit with Gareth's name, familiar and heavy. I didn't hesitate, but I braced myself. "Heard you've been playing detective up at the old place," he said, voice smooth. "Careful, sis. Those old floors might collapse." Beneath the faux concern, there was a threat. He knew I was onto something. I caught my breath, steadying my tone. "Thanks for the warning," I replied. "Wouldn't want to fall through what you built?" His silence stretched. "Don't act too cocky. You don't know what you're poking at." I closed my eyes briefly. "I know more than you think." He hung up without a word. I stared at my phone, heart thudding. Not from panic, but clarity. I had spent years excusing their cruelty as petty grudges. Now it looked like deliberate humiliation masked as kinship. Later that evening, Gareth invited me to dinner. The invitation read casual. The undercurrent was anything but. I fought the urge to refuse. I needed to see how far he'd go in front of witnesses. At my mother Elaine's home, everything was immaculate. The air smelled of fresh lilies and white wine. The furniture gleamed. The walls were silent and spotless. Mom stood near the doorway, greeting me with a measured nod. "I wish you'd called before showing up at Reed Haven," she said in her clipped tone. "You're stirring things best left buried." I didn't argue. I stepped inside, set aside my bag, and forced a polite nod. But her gaze flickered away. At the table, Gareth rose with a wineglass raised. "To family, and to knowing our place," he toasted, eyes narrowing at me. My cousins giggled. Someone murmured, "Even $1 buys a seat tonight." Every word stung like salt. My throat tightened, but I kept still. I glanced at the napkin folded in front of me, a leaf shape. I recognized that fold. Grandpa used to do that. Thanksgiving dinners, my small hands clapping, trying to help. A memory of warmth, long since lost. He looked at me, waiting. I raised my glass. "Everyone deserves a seat at the table," I said softly. Silence dropped like a weight. Gareth laughed, eyes flicking to Mom. "True, but only if you're willing to earn it." I didn't shout. I watched. I calculated. When he mentioned finalizing some property transfers, I leaned forward. "You mean the ones Grandpa wanted sent to his charity fund?" His smirk cracked. Mom's fork clinked sharply against her plate. She snapped, "Marin, stop it." It was the first time I saw hesitation in her. The table fell silent. Gareth's expression hardened. For a long second, he looked brittle. He regained composure, but I knew I'd landed a hit. After dinner, I stepped into the evening air. The porch lights were warm, the night quiet. Gareth followed. Shadowed by lamppost glow, his face looked different. Less arrogance, more calculation. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. "You don't know what you're getting into. Stay out of this." I didn't step back. Instead, I looked him in the eyes. "You've already taken everything I had. What else is there left for you?" He stared like he tried to absorb it. Then he turned sharply and walked away. My heart pounded. I slipped into my car. In the rear view, I watched him standing there, no longer mocking, just unsettled. I whispered, "You should have left me my silence." Driving away, the night wrapped me in its quiet, but inside something lit. A war had begun, and I would not lose. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 a.m. The rain had slowed to a mist, tapping against my windows like a restless thought. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Gareth's voice. That smug warning, "You don't know what you're getting into." He was wrong. For the first time, I knew exactly what I was getting into. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and reached for the folder Mr. Hale had given me days ago. I'd read it twice already, but something tugged at me, a feeling that I'd missed something. I flipped through the pages again, slower this time. And there it was. A faded photograph had slipped between two documents. My grandfather standing beside a much younger Gareth at a construction site. Behind them, a sign, Reed Haven Charitable Trust. My stomach tightened. Written beneath it, in my grandfather's shaky penmanship, "Some things built for others are never meant to be stolen." I ran my fingers over the words, as if touching them could make them less painful. Legacy theft. That's what this was. Not a feud, not a misunderstanding. A theft of something sacred. I stared at the clock, 4:12 a.m. There was no point in pretending I could rest. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and the folder. The rain had started again by the time I reached the car, but I didn't care. I drove north toward Reed Haven, headlights cutting through the fog like fragile promises. The estate loomed in the gray light of dawn. I parked at the edge of the property, stepped out, and pulled my coat tighter against the cold. The gate was still open from before, slightly ajar as if waiting for me. Inside, everything felt heavier, the air, the silence, even the memories. My flashlight beam quivered across the walls as I made my way back into the study. The desk drawers were still slightly open from my last visit. I started pulling them out, one by one, methodically. The bottom drawer stuck at first, then gave way with a soft creak. Inside was an envelope, the same wax seal, the same ring mark. Across the front, in faded ink, "For the rightful one." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were ledgers, old, detailed, meticulous, bank records, transfer receipts, all bearing the same name, Reed Haven Charitable Trust. But the destination accounts were different. They led to a company under Gareth's name. My heart dropped into my stomach. Each line item was worse than the last. Donations redirected, property sales disguised as development expenses. My brother's empire had been built from stolen charity funds, and beneath those papers, a small black voice recorder. I pressed play. For a moment, static. Then his voice, my grandfather's voice, filled the room, thin and worn, but steady. "If you're hearing this, it means they took everything. But the estate isn't theirs. To keep. Not if you remember what truth costs. Every dollar has its price, even one." I froze. The words echoed through me. It wasn't grief I felt. It was rage. Cold, sharp, and clear. He had known what they were doing. And he'd trusted me to uncover it. I shoved the papers and the recorder into my bag. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something off. The front door wasn't fully closed. It was open, just an inch. I stopped breathing. The sound of a creak upstairs sent a chill down my spine. "Who's there?" I called, voice low, controlled. Nothing, just silence. Then, a sudden flurry of movement. Footsteps retreating, fast. I ran to the window, pulling the curtain back just in time to catch the black SUV tearing down the road. Same one, same tinted glass. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. Whoever they were, they knew I was close. I locked the door behind me, sat in the car, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. By the time the sun rose, I was parked outside Mr. Hale's office, waiting. He arrived early, surprised to see me standing by the door with a folder in my arms. "Marin," he said, blinking. "What happened?" "I have evidence," I said, my voice steady. "And you need to see this." Inside, under the soft buzz of fluorescent light, I spread everything on his desk. The ledgers, the transfers, the photo, the note. He looked through them slowly, his face tightening with every page. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling. "Marin, this could destroy your entire family." I met his gaze. Then let it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a single envelope, sealed and marked with my grandfather's handwriting. "He left this too," Hale said. "Said I'd know when to give it to you." I broke the seal with shaking hands. Inside was a single legal document. At the top, trustee appointment, Reed Haven Charitable Trust. Beneath it, my name. I blinked, unable to speak. "He named you successor trustee," Hale said softly. "You're the rightful steward of everything Reed Haven represents." I sat back, breath catching. The dollar, the letter, the key. It all made sense now. "That $1, I whispered, voice trembling but sure. It wasn't a punishment. I looked up at him, tears welling. Not from pain this time, but clarity. It was proof. That morning, I realized the inheritance wasn't money. It was the truth. And truth, once revealed, never goes quietly. I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed across the counter. Gareth, again. I stared at the screen for a beat before answering. "You really think you can win?" He started without even saying hello. "You're not strong enough for this, Marin. You never were." I took a slow sip. "Then you really shouldn't have underestimated me." He laughed, a cold, dry sound that scraped down my spine. "Dad left you nothing. You were an afterthought, always were. That estate means nothing without my signature." I let the silence hang just long enough. Then I said, "Funny because I just signed something that says otherwise." There was a pause, just a second, but I heard it, that flicker of panic. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." He hung up. I stood there, mug in hand, the city waking up outside my window, knowing full well the wolves were circling. By early afternoon, they came fast. My email account locked me out with an unauthorized access warning. My phone started glitching, apps freezing. Then, while trying to buy gas, my card was declined. Twice. I didn't panic, not outwardly. But a knot began to form low in my stomach. I drove straight to Mr. Hale's office, parked, and walked in without calling ahead. He looked up from his desk, surprised. "You saw it?" he asked. "Saw what?" He slid a stack of legal papers toward me. "Your brother's attorneys filed for an injunction this morning. They're claiming you forged the trustee documents." My heart sank, but I didn't flinch. "They're trying to bury me," I said. "They're trying to scare you," Hale corrected. "And I'll admit, they're good at it." I reached into my bag, pulled out the voice recorder, and placed it on his desk. "Let's see how they argue with a dead man." He raised an eyebrow, pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the room, steady despite the years it had sat hidden. "If you're hearing this, it means they took everything. But the estate isn't theirs to keep, not if you remember what truth costs. Every dollar has its price, even one." Hale's face changed as he listened. When the recording ended, he leaned back, eyes fixed on mine. "This changes everything," he said quietly. The sun was dipping low by the time I left the office. I tried to keep my mind steady, focused on next steps, but halfway home, I noticed the black car behind me. Same make, same slow distance. I took a few turns I didn't need to. The car stayed with me. I pulled into a gas station on 8th and pretended to check my tire pressure. The car pulled in and idled by the curb. He stepped out, tall, maybe mid-40s, gray suit too polished for a guy pumping gas. I recognized him, Martin Doyle, real estate lawyer, Gareth's fixer. He walked up, smooth, like he had all the time in the world. "Your brother asked me to remind you that family loyalty is still worth something." I crossed my arms. "So is justice." He smiled like I was amusing. "Justice doesn't pay your rent." Then he handed me an envelope. Settlement offer. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I turned and dropped it in the trash next to the pump. You can tell him, I said, I'm done selling silence. He stared at me a beat too long, then nodded once, turned, and walked away. Back home, I locked the door behind me and dropped my bag by the couch. The apartment felt different now, not smaller, just sharper. Like the air knew things were shifting. I went to the table and pulled out the napkin I hadn't realized I kept, the one folded into that small leaf from the dinner. I unfolded it, laid it flat next to the photo of my grandfather on the desk. They mocked this, I whispered. But you always said leaves grow back stronger after the storm. As I smoothed the cloth, something caught my eye. Tiny stitching in the corner. RHT, 3 initials. My heart skipped. I turned to the legal seal on the trust papers. The same initials engraved into the wax. He'd made this napkin. It wasn't just decoration, it was proof. Proof that the table they laughed at was once his. Proof that the trust was real, that I was real. They wanted to erase me. But they forgot. I was raised by the man who wrote every rule they're breaking. And now, I had more than truth. I had the fire to burn down their lies. And once something is set ablaze, it doesn't ask for permission, it just consumes. By late morning, I was already pulling into the private garage beneath the Wythe Development Building, Gareth's kingdom of glass, concrete, and ego. I took the elevator up without announcing myself. No hesitation, no second guessing. The doors slid open onto a floor so polished it could have been a mirror. His receptionist startled when she saw me, but after a brief, wide-eyed pause, she motioned me through. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Gareth was already standing when I walked in, leaning against his desk like a man who thought he was untouchable. Well, he said, arms crossed. You actually came. Brave, I'll give you that. Still pointless. I didn't speak. I placed one single sheet of paper on his desk, the original Reed Haven trust deed, the one he thought was buried. You used Grandpa's name to fund your luxury projects. That ends today. He barely looked down before chuckling. You think some piece of paper changes anything? You have no idea what these documents mean. I may not, I said, locking eyes with him. But I know what the law says, and I know what forgery looks like. His laugh stopped short. His jaw tightened, just for a second. And that second told me everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded napkin, unfolded it carefully, let the corner catch the light. The embroidered letters, RHT. You remember these? I asked. Grandpa made them for family dinners. His smirk faded. So? He used the same custom seal thread for all his official documents. I had it tested. This stitching matches the wax composition on the trust seals you filed. He stepped forward, snatching the napkin from my hand and holding it up like he might tear it. But he didn't. He stared. You wouldn't. I already did, I said. Then came the outburst I was waiting for. He slammed his hand on the desk so hard, the mug beside him jumped and rolled off, shattering against the floor. You think you can humiliate me? You think that'll bring him back? I didn't flinch. I stood my ground. No, I said, voice even. But I think you've done a pretty good job of humiliating yourself. The silence in the room became thick, almost alive. A few hours later, I sat across from Mr. Hale again. This time, his suit jacket was off, and his sleeves were rolled up like a man preparing for war. You forced his hand, he said, flipping through the scans of Gareth's paperwork and the forensic analysis I'd submitted. He's filing injunctions in 3 different courts, trying to flood the system with chaos. Sounds about right, I said. He's panicking, Marin. Good, I said softly, though my chest felt heavier than I let on. Mr. Hale leaned forward, hands clasped. But are you ready for what happens next? This isn't just Gareth anymore. It's his investors, his lawyers, the board members who turned a blind eye. When this goes public, it's not just one empire falling, it's a network. I looked out his office window. The city glittered in the autumn light, cold and beautiful. Then it's time the truth burns through every shadow it built. He nodded. So be it. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into my street. Leaves blew across the pavement, rustling like whispers. Something felt wrong before I even stepped out of the car. The front door to my apartment was cracked open, just enough to make my stomach twist. Inside, drawers had been yanked out, papers scattered. The couch cushions slashed, dresser overturned. But it wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. On the kitchen table, centered beneath the overhead light, was a dollar bill. The same one. I recognized the worn corner, the slight tear near Washington's eye. It was taped to a note. Next time, it won't just be your house. For a second, I just stood there, letting the weight of it settle on me. Let the chill crawl under my skin. Then I picked up the dollar, peeled the tape off gently, and folded it just like I had the night of the reading, tucked it into my wallet. You started this with $1, I whispered. Let's see what it's worth now. I slid the wallet back into my purse and sat at the edge of the couch, listening to the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. It wasn't even 7 a.m. yet, but the city had already started its slow stir outside my window. I hadn't slept, not really, just laid there watching shadows stretch across the ceiling, waiting for the world to catch up to what I already knew. Then came the headlines. Every major channel played the same footage. Gareth, suit wrinkled, stepping out of a black car surrounded by reporters. His jaw was set tight, his eyes darting like he didn't know where to look. The confident air he wore like armor was gone, replaced by something I recognized from our childhood. Fear, shame pretending to be anger. The crawl under the screen read, Wythe Development under investigation for fraud, charity embezzlement. My phone buzzed against the counter. A message from Mr. Hale. The court accepted the recording. It's official. You did it. I set the phone down. The words felt heavy. Not in a bad way, but in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't pride. It was something colder, quieter. Like the end of a long, brutal storm where you finally see the wreckage for what it is. A few hours later, I stepped out of a cab in front of the courthouse. The air was damp again, light rain clinging to my coat, just like the day I'd first found Reed Haven. Reporters lined the stairs, but I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just walked straight through them like fog. Inside, the courtroom buzzed low. Gareth sat at the front with his lawyers, dressed in charcoal gray, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. He saw me enter, didn't look away. The arguments came in waves. His team tried everything. Technicalities, loopholes, accusations of tampering. They claimed the trust had been outdated, that I didn't have standing, that the materials I submitted were fabricated, anything to distract. But then Mr. Hale stood and held up the napkin. He walked to the judge's bench and handed it over, along with the forensic lab report tying the thread in the stitching to the wax on the original trust documents. There was a silence in the courtroom, real, deep. Even Gareth's attorneys paused, faces tight. When I was asked to speak, I kept it short. They laughed when I said all I got was $1, I said, steady. But that dollar opened the only door that mattered. The judge didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at me for a long moment before turning to the bench to deliberate. When it was over, Gareth stood. He didn't come toward me, just glared from across the aisle. You think they'll remember you as the hero? He hissed. You just destroyed our name. I looked him in the eye, calm, tired. No, I said. I just reminded them who built it. He didn't answer, just turned and left, flanked by lawyers, his steps no longer steady. By late afternoon, it was official. Gareth's assets were frozen. The court filed multiple counts of fraud. Civil, criminal, the works. The news ran loops of the ruling while I sat in my car, parked down the block. Rain tapped on the windshield, soft and rhythmic. The courthouse loomed behind me like a tombstone. I pulled out the dollar bill again. I'd looked at it 100 times, but something new caught my eye this time, barely visible unless you held it to the light just right. Tiny pressed letters, faded almost to nothing. For the one who values truth more than gold. I froze, stared at it, ran my thumb across the words. It was his handwriting, my grandfather's. And for the first time in years, I cried, not out of pain or loss or rage, but release, like some old knot had finally been untied inside me. Just after sundown, I pulled off the gravel road into the drive at Reed Haven. I left the car running for a moment, then cut the engine and listened. The estate was quiet, wrapped in dusk. The doors creaked open like they remembered me. I walked slowly through the halls, past rooms still filled with dust and echoes, until I reached the study. I lit the old brass lamp, the same one he used when he'd write late into the night. I placed the dollar down where his photograph had once stood. "You were right," I whispered. It was never about money. Then I closed the worn leather journal, turned off the light, and made my way back outside. The sky had deepened into indigo. Cool air brushed my skin, clean and unfamiliar. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A local number. I answered. "Ms. Wythe?" the voice asked, breathless. "This is Claire Ramsey from Channel 4. Would you be willing to give a statement about the inheritance?" I paused, watching the last bit of light fade over the hills. Then I smiled. "Just tell them," I said. "It was worth every penny." The phone call ended, and I lowered it gently onto the kitchen counter. The air in the house had a certain stillness to it, like something had finally exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly, more like space. Space where pain used to live. I stood there for a while, hands resting on the edge of the counter, watching the early light paint soft stripes across the floorboards. Outside, the morning sun stretched through the mist hanging low over the fields. The trees behind the estate stood tall, unmoved by everything that had happened. And maybe that was the point. The land had always been here, long before us, and it would remain long after. But today, Reed Haven finally felt like it belonged to itself again. I slipped off my shoes and walked barefoot through the hallway. The cedar beneath my feet felt warm, welcoming in a way it never had before. My fingertips brushed lightly along the walls, the same ones I once feared would crumble under the weight of secrets. But now, they just stood silent, not haunted, just still. The light poured in golden through the tall windows, catching the dust in the air like snow in sunlight. I passed the old grandfather clock, which had long since stopped ticking, and entered the study. The desk stood exactly as it always had. The lamp was still there, its brass slightly tarnished, and the chair let out a familiar soft creak when I sank into it. I took a deep breath, then opened the journal one final time. There, beneath his last words, I wrote my own. "Truth isn't inherited, it's rebuilt." I closed the cover slowly, my fingers lingering on the worn leather for a moment before looking up at the wall. The dollar bill sat behind glass now, carefully framed. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The Price of Peace." I stared at it, remembering every second of that day. The smirks, the stares, the way the room had filled with cruel laughter when I opened the envelope. I could still feel the heat that burned under my skin. And yet, I smiled. "They thought they buried me," I whispered to the still air, "but they planted me instead." Around noon, I heard a knock at the front door. I met Mr. Hale on the porch, his face softer than I'd ever seen it. "The paperwork is finalized," he said. "Reed Haven's officially registered as a shelter, just like he wanted." I stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. We walked together to the study. He looked around as though seeing it for the first time, not as a lawyer, but as someone who could finally appreciate the story this place had always been trying to tell. "He built this for second chances," I said, voice quiet but sure. "I think I finally understand that." Mr. Hale nodded thoughtfully. "And what about you, Marin? What happens now?" I turned toward the window. Sunlight filtered through the swaying leaves, casting soft shadows on the desk. "I'll stay," I said. "At least for a while, maybe learn what peace feels. Like when you stop fighting ghosts." He smiled then, and we sat for a moment in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. The afternoon faded gently. I spent it cleaning the corners of the house I had once avoided, running my hands across picture frames and folded linens, opening windows that hadn't let air through in years. With each step, the space grew lighter, not brighter, just easier to breathe in. As evening settled, I found myself on the porch. A faint breeze danced through the trees, rustling the leaves like a quiet hymn. In my hand, I held my grandfather's pocket watch, a small silver thing I'd found earlier in a drawer beneath the desk. It still ticked, slow and steady. I sat on the steps and listened. The wind moved gently through the trees, the same rhythm I'd felt that night with the napkin in my hand. Back then, I thought it was coincidence. Now I knew better. That echo had always been there. It was the rhythm of this place, the heartbeat he left behind. I looked out over the fields, the sky now streaked in amber and violet. "It started with $1, I murmured, "but it ended with freedom." I closed the watch with a soft click and stood. The house behind me glowed faintly from within, warm and alive. I left the front door open as I stepped inside, not because I was expecting anyone, but because, for the first time, I didn't need to lock it. And for the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned.